right, I'm seeing some attendees file in. We'll wait just 2 more minutes and see who else joins us. Okay. All right, I guess we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our 3rd Somerville Junction Park public meeting. We can go to the next slide. I am Rebecca McKevitz, and I am a public space planner with the City of Somerville's Public Space and Urban Forestry Division. And so tonight we have a similar agenda to last time. I'm going to do some introductions and housekeeping, talk a little bit about the history of the project, and then I'm going to pass it off to our team over at Crowley Cottrell to talk about the progress that we've made on the design of the park since our last meeting, and then we look forward to hearing comments and questions from you all at the end of the meeting. Next slide. So just as a reminder, I hope everyone is aware of the webpage. It's somervillema.gov/Junction Park. That's where you can find all of the updates on the project from meetings and all of our slide decks. And we're going to continue to sort of update that page as the project progresses from here. The Somerville Parks Instagram page also has lots of updates about what our division is up to. And if you have any questions or comments about the project, you can feel free to reach out to me directly at my email address, which is on the screen, rmckevitz@somervillema.gov. Next slide. All right, so I'll give a brief project history. We've gone over this in the past, so I will be really, really quick. Next slide. So in 2006, there was some environmental testing done at the current Somerville Junction site, and there was some contaminated soils found. And so the city of Somerville led a cleanup effort that was completed in 2008. And the park was open for passive uses sort of in the state that it was in before GLX began their work. And then in 2017, sure enough, GLX comes in and begins using the parking lot area as their sort of loading in and out and sort of access down to the train tracks while they are doing construction on the Green Line extension. They are almost out of the parking lot, and they're sort of preparing for us to take over the site and begin our project. Over the summer, last summer, we held our very, very first meeting with you all, and that was a listening session for us to gear up for our park grant application. Sure enough, we were awarded the park grant and some community preservation funding, and so that's how we were able to kick off this design process. We also been working with an LSP to better understand the soil conditions and any limitations for this project. And then starting in the winter, we started working with our team now, Leah and Naomi at Crowley Cottrell, and we're thinking about how to redesign and reconstruct the Junction Park, sort of the phase 1 where the grassy knoll is now, and also the addition of the parking lot space next to it. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Junction Park is along the Green Line extension. So that's been sort of a key element as we think about how to design this park and what it's going to look like and function as in the future. So just wanted to point out on this map kind of where the park is going to be in the larger context of the Green Line extension. Next slide. And then as we zoom in a little bit, again, I'm sure at this point you're all aware of where the site is, but it's sort of tucked in along Central Street is where the parking lot entrance is. Otherwise, you can enter from Woodbine. And again, it's sort of tucked right along the Green Line extension, the train tracks. Next slide. And so we did also talk about this last time, but as a reminder of the next steps. So today we're having our third public meeting. That's the first thing you'll see on this slide. And then we will use the rest of the summer into the fall to finalize the schematic design and the construction drawings. And that will allow us to go out to bid and find a contractor that is able to build the project. We anticipate some construction starting this calendar year, likely on the path portion of the site. And then next spring, we will begin in earnest sort of constructing the park part of the site. So that's a look at what is to come. But for right now, I will pass it off to Leah and Naomi, and they're going to tell us more about what they've been up to on their side of things.
Hi, everybody. Glad to have folks still interested in hearing us talk. So we'll try to make this not only informative, but entertaining. I'm just going to introduce us really quick. I'm Naomi Cottrell, principal, and Leah Broder is here with me tonight, associate and the project manager on the project. Sorry for those who've heard me say this before, but we have at our office a decade of park design experience throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and further afield. And we're just excited to be back here in Somerville doing this work with you all. Go to the next slide. So this is the third meeting, and tonight really our goal is to go a little bit further into the development on the things that we have been working on to date. We got a lot of great feedback during the May public meeting, which really helped us organize the principal character for the site, which what we did, what we talked about as far as path and place was concerned, was really trying to have distinct characters between the way in which the community path that runs through the park would feel versus how the remainder of the park really engaged the neighbors in a very different character. And then last June, when we met with you all, the last meeting, we heard a lot of really good feedback about some of the questions about the space, the places along these paths that we're creating, and what might happen in those spots. We're excited that a lot of what we heard really rallied around a lot more opportunities for passive recreation for everyone, to really slow down and take some time away from the fast pace. And then also understanding that it's undeniable that we will have this active recreational corridor that will go through the site, and how and when those more passive recreational opportunities kind of come together with the active. And so tonight, really what we want to do, and hopefully this is fun for you all, as fun as it was for us to put it together, really start to look at how we define the different spaces in the park and give you a taste or a flavor on how it's going to look and feel through some modeling that we've done to sort of get all of us into the space a little bit. Go ahead. So tonight, really, again, it is really our meeting goal. The big goal is to understand the look and feel of the path, the places and the paths. And again, to reiterate some of the project goals, we're really excited about this expansion. So how do we best really take advantage of the extra space that's being afforded by this addition, and really start to make this a real destination on the community path. We can go ahead. So if you were with us last time, this will be, again, a little bit of a repeat, but we really defined the site into 3 different character zones, and really working from the right side of the page to the left, started to talk about these different zones. So understanding that we have this connection from the east, that is going to be the community path that will come across Center Street. We wanted to provide what we call the gateway into the park, an opportunity to have people on bike as well as pedestrians to slow down and have a little bit of a pause, like a threshold, and then before really going either to again up into the site on a neighborhood path, which is a smaller scale, or continuing along on the wider community path. The gateway really is the idea, and you'll see as we go through the different sides, is the idea of this pause, this gathering, this moment before then moving on. The second area that we're going to get into more detail on is what we've called the alley. An alley is actually a term that means a double row of trees, and that's really one of the primary features of this section of the site, is that we've put in a strong double row of trees that really help to define the narrowest part of the site. And here really we have, the tightest part of the site. We have opportunities for the pedestrians and the community path with bikers to experience the shade and the space really underneath this row of trees. And then the part that we're calling the oasis is really the space where the site opens up. It is twice, if not almost 3 times the size of the circle that makes up the current park. So we are actually expanding that and also developing more areas that are really provide for a respite and gathering for the community, for again, passive recreation and a lot of planting, the possibility to gather with neighbors, and other amenities. So with that, with the idea behind these 3 zones, I'm going to have Leah just walk you through, take you on a tour of the different areas.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is move through a series of slides that will first show you enlargements of these different zones. And following the enlarged plan, we'll show you a rendered view, so a 3-dimensional view of each. Starting with the gateway. So what you see here is what Naomi had described. The continuation to the east of the community path is aligned along there'll be a new striped crosswalk here. So striped crosswalk and then entrance to a generous paved community path that is widened with what is shown in yellow throughout all of our plans representing the neighborhood path. The idea here is that the wider gray path is that shared community path, primarily for bikes and folks moving faster or longer distances, and the kind of creamy yellow tone represents the neighborhood path for slower pace, folks who really want to explore the park. We've separated the park from the street with a guardrail, low timber rail, which you'll see in the model in a moment. And then there's kind of a seat wall here and here and here, framing some gathering areas with site furnishings, places to sit, places to park your bike. These circles, the 9 circles, represent a grove of trees. And to the north, in this brown color, is an overlook. So we're occupying the historic top landing of the steps down to the actual railroad junction. So what does that really feel like or look like on the ground? This is a modeled view standing on Central Street looking into the park. So you see this kind of wide entrance into the park on the community path, the timber guardrail in the foreground, and then a grove of trees over these seating and bike parking areas. And then on the right is this overlook that will have a fence so that there's no danger of falling. And then in the distance, you see the beginning of the alley. So we'll continue on the tour. Follow me. This is the alley. So what Naomi was referring to as the narrowest portion of the site. The community path here is expanded on both sides with neighborhood paths, so different kind of paving, and then little places pulled off from that with places to sit, benches, and buddy spots for dogs or folks with mobility devices. The overlook is, there's a second overlook here in this alley portion, so another opportunity for long views over the rail corridor, some movable furniture. And then the path begins to split heading south and sloping up, and you'll see that in the model. Along the southern border of the site, and you'll see this is pretty continuous throughout the park, is what we're calling the Woodland Buffer. And that's the idea of some understory trees that pair with the existing tall canopy trees that are already on the southern border to give a real buffer and edge for all of the residents to the south. So standing at the east side of the alley, you're standing in this view on the community path. You see the neighborhood path, this different kind of paving on both sides. And here on the left, it kind of splits off and peels up and starts to follow the slope up toward what is the large lawn area. On the right is that overlook we were describing with a nice rail with a place to rest your arms. We can imagine some furnishings there, movable furnishing, benches on the left, and then that woodland, planted woodland buffer along the left. And here you start to see the repetition of that double row of trees. In the distance, you're starting to see the bottom of a series of seat walls, which I'll get to next. And in the image on the right would be the, there's a little train, the green line. So moving further west, so we've got the alley on the right, and now we're entering into the oasis. So the oasis is where we're mounding up soil to create a real knoll area here. So this is kind of the top of the slope. That neighborhood path slopes up to get you to this upper level. So you're really on kind of a promontory overlooking both the community path and the rail line. The seat walls on the right are stepped at 3 levels, so it becomes a kind of an amphitheater, which you'll see in the next image. Again, you see that woodland buffer, the circles representing a variety of trees along the southern border. These white rectangles represent hammocks. So we're thinking about some fun hammock posts so people could bring hammocks and come hang out to spend long periods of time just lounging, and little areas for site furniture. These are Adirondack chairs. And then the sprinkling of dots represents a log climb, and we'll show you some log steppers. We'll show you some images of those a bit later in the presentation. So we've continued our tour, and we're standing now at the west end of these seat walls, and we're looking up the slope and looking back toward where we've just come from. So you see that series of stepped seat walls, opportunities to hang out. This lower level is the wide community path. We've got some native shrub planting on the steep slopes. And on the upper level, you can see folks walking on that neighborhood path, that separate secondary golden colored path, the yellow brick road. So so now we've moved into the portion of the oasis that is this big bowl of a lawn. So we are continuing to mound up topography so that, again, you're at a high point at this southern portion of the lawn. So and then there's a slope that could be occupied or lounged on. You look out over the lawn, there's another overlook and picnic seat picnic areas with furnishings, the circles and rectangles representing various kinds of furniture, tables and chairs, and chaise lounges. This is a long seat wall. And then to the left, you're beginning to see the braided paths that move down to the neighborhood. There's a second or tertiary way to move down to the main community path from this circle. We got some great comments from community members about how people might want to circulate through the site. And so we've done our best to try and address all the ways people might like to explore. So that represents steps down to the community path from the overlook.
Leah, let me just interject here, if you can go back for a minute.
Yeah.
I think it's important to show folks where we are showing mown lawn versus not, maybe in this image.
Yes, yes. So the light green represents mown lawn. And we're trying in kind of site-wide to confine the areas of lawn to really the usable spaces. And then this lavender color represents a zone of pollinator planting interspersed with native grasses. We'll show you some images and talk a bit more about the planting later, but there would be mown lawn on both sides of this neighborhood path, and obviously inside the bowl of the main lawn area. So standing, so again, we've walked further to the west and we're looking back. So we're standing about here and we're looking back over this overlook spot. So you've got the overlook with some tables and chairs to the right. At the very corner here, you see this paving that's lower down, and that is the community path. So we really have separated the neighborhood circulation in this area from the community path, which was one of the goals that we heard from a lot of folks in our previous public meetings. And then you're seeing this kind of representation of an idea of the long grasses and pollinator flowers versus the big area or the bigger area of mown lawn where there's plenty of place to play. And then that slope where folks could lounge. You're seeing the seat wall, the long seat wall along the top edge, and that's the upper path that leads you all the way down to the alley. So thinking a lot also about the entry to the park from the west. So in this northwest corner, focusing on how folks will arrive from the community path if they're coming from, let's say, Davis Square or points west. So the community path would meet up with the Junction Park community path. And there's a kind of shaded zone with this double row of trees. So you really immediately are provided shade and some cover and respite. And it also cues you to the entrance of the park, along with signage and other amenities. So amenities for the bikes, drinking fountains and things we'll talk about when we get to all the site furnishings. Again, a long seat wall. So this is doing double duty of helping us to manage the grades and get a sloped accessible path up to the lawn and also provide a place to sit. And then this kind of braided interface of paths, providing various ways for folks to get up into the park from the neighborhood to the south. And the wider path extends all the way down to Center Street and Woodbine. So a view standing at that entrance from, let's say, the western portion of the community path, seeing some bike racks and that seat wall, the entrance to the neighborhood. So my hand, hopefully you can see, is moving over that path, and that represents the path in the plan down to the south. And then you can kind of see the length of the park, the slope down to the rail, And in the center, kind of the mid-ground of the image is that pollinator planting, and then the large lawn area with the upper level path and seating and the lower level overlook. So if you were standing kind of in the neighborhood moving into the park, so coming from the southwest, this would be kind of be your view. So you see the wider path that leads you straight down to the community path and that seat wall and area with some site furnishings. And then you're seeing a couple of options for ways to move up into the bowl of the lawn and continue to move through the park. Again, using grasses and pollinators on those slopes and mown lawn adjacent to the path. You're seeing in this image and all of the previous images, though I didn't mention it, a series of lights, and we have a strategy for lighting all of the paths and occupiable spaces in a way that will minimize light pollution, but provide safety and safe ways to use the park in the evening hours. So I'm going to pass the mic back over to Naomi, who's going to talk about a variety of site-wide strategies for the real materials and elements and site furnishings that we've thought about. I'll just preface it by saying, you know, we're still in the design process. And so all of these images are trying to communicate what we're thinking about. The specificity of each may change, but the big ideas we think are all there. And so we're eager to share them with you and to hear your feedback.
Great.
Naomi?
Okay. So I'll go through these quickly because we would love to hear, you know, comments, but really want to give you guys the rundown of materials. So paving is always important, and accessibility of the utmost importance as far as paving is concerned. So we are using pretty tried and true materials, especially the community path, which will be a continuation of the same asphalt specification that is throughout the rest of the city. The neighborhood path, we would like to propose it being concrete for several reasons. I mean, really great as far as accessibility is concerned, but also a light color. So as far as heat exposure, it keeps things cooler. We do want to have specialty materials at the two, you know, the gateway, one on the east, one on the west, these entry spots. And in both of these conditions, we want to make sure that we can get a lot of trees growing in and around these areas. So looking at different kinds of permeable pavers that can happen here so that trees and the paving can be harmonious. And then at the overlooks, really thinking about looking at some kind of decking material. So whether that's wood or a composite, or some other kind of accessible deck that can be elevated to really give those spaces some continuity through the site, but also to make them different and special as little moments in these places along the path. So the next slide is just going to just show kind of, you know, what those materials look like. Again, the community path asphalt, most folks will be familiar with this, and even the neighborhood path being concrete. But when we get into the gateway materials and the overlooks, wanting to have something that has a little bit more texture, a little bit less straightforward, so that they do make the places feel a little bit more special. Go ahead. Our lighting strategy for the park is very much dependent on how we think the speed is and sort of the size of the path. So they all do relate to paths, not trying to really light the large lawn within the oasis, but trying to have lights so that people can very safely move through the park at night. And so where we began with that is there is a community path light standard, which is a pole light that is quite large, but is consistent throughout the areas that GLX has been working. We do want to then bring the scale down, especially in the gateway area over by Central Street. We're showing what we're calling here is Catenary Lights, and that's really just a series of poles or structures. That's the part that we invest the money in, is to have poles so that we can have some kind of temporary string light or different lights that can be hung up during the course of the year, but really that we set this grid out that relates with the trees so that this place can have a special lower level of lighting. The neighborhood path then would be lit two ways. One is the bollard light, which is the lower level light that really lights just the path. And then around the grassy oval, having a pedestrian pole light, so a little bit lower. All of the fixtures would have cutoffs for the neighborhood side of the, so that light spill wouldn't be going into people's houses, and also cut off as far as dark night sky compliant. Can you go to the next page? So that's some of the things that we're talking about here. The community path pole light, again, is the largest one, and they're spaced the farthest apart because they are so tall, and that again is the standard for community path. And then you'll see that we start to get lower and lower as we get, on a smaller scale path. And then the catenary, one of the things about the catenary as far as outdoor gathering, this can be on a switch and a timer that turns off at a certain hour so that people aren't encouraged to gather. But it's a great way to have for events or sort of the shoulder hours of the evening and morning. Okay. We have a lot of site furnishings that we're talking about. So this is one of the slides that you're going to see a couple different times, but we wanted to really spell this out for folks because this is really gives you the idea about how we expect the site to be occupied. So we know that we've heard a lot of interest in passive recreation. When I mean passive recreation, I mean the opportunity to gather with neighbors, not a prescribed, say, sport or recreational, but that it's really about walking, strolling, and gathering in a real informal way. So what we usually like to do for communities is to provide lots of different types of passive recreational furniture. So that will be everything from the seat walls that you've heard us talk about and show in the renderings that are real fixed and are something that's kind of a harder thing, to something that's a little bit more loungy, like the hammock, and really everywhere in between. So one of the other things that we wanted to show in this diagram is that the seat walls and things like picnic tables show up more than once. We're trying to really sprinkle them throughout the park so that all along the whole length of the community path that there's activation. This is so that someone, again, with mobility challenges can sit all the way along the path, can stop and rest, but it also gives the opportunity for you to go on a Monday to sit on one bench, and then on a Tuesday you can be on a different part of the site and have a very different experience. So if we go ahead to the next slide, you can just see some of the sort of the palette of some of the types of furnishings that we want to think about. So fixed things like benches, again, seat walls, picnic tables with the ability for accessibility. So whether it's an end that cantilevers off to the side so someone can come in with a mobility device on the sides, or whether it is a table and chairs that has buddy spots, to things that are very casual, like the movable Adirondack chairs, like the movable chaises, and then again, things like the hammocks, which would be a bring your own situation, but we would provide poles. Go ahead. We also want to acknowledge the fact that this site is also going to be an active zone for biking, walking, running, and that predominantly will happen along the community path. We've always talked about this site as being, a junction of path and place. And so there are these places on entrance into the park that are really important to provide for everybody in the community, whether they're on foot or on bike or otherwise. So this is where we're clustering the amenities that aid in the active recreation of biking and running and other things. So looking into these misting stations, the bike repair stations, drinking fountains, and again, clustered on the two ends, because the idea is that you either get off your bike or running in the beginning or the end of your jaunt through Junction Park. We do have a couple other little active recreational pieces that we want to think about, including dog walking amenities, which includes drinking fountains that provide dog bowls, but also things like we'd heard last time when we heard from you all about some of the alternatives for whether it's the waste receptacles for pets or some of the techniques being used to try to encourage a dog station for going to the bathroom. So we do want to try those things again, thinking that those are on the edges. So as you're coming and going out of the site, those are appropriate places for that to happen. I'm going to go ahead and we'll show some of those, what those look like. So, pretty typical things like we will be installing big belly trash cans so that again, on these edges coming and going, there's ability for you to leave your refuse behind. I love this image in the middle. The bikers, the dogs, and the people on foot can all use the same drinking fountain. Misting stations, same. We will provide it near both community path and neighborhood path. And then again, providing all other site amenities for bikes. And then the image on the lower left that we think would be great to incorporate along with the hammock area is just a real casual, whether it looks more artistic or whether it looks, it's really for kids to imagine and have a little bit of fun themselves. I'll continue. And then last within the site furnishings, we did want to say that we also are thinking about signage and art. And unlike whether it's active or passive recreation, we do think that these should be distributed pretty consistently across the site to give opportunities, again, to give people a draw to different locations. So we know that we need to have some wayfinding. We would like to have, again, in the thresholds that are on the two ends of the site to make sure that people can orient themselves to where they're going. We would love to have art or history or interpretive signage at the different overlooks and the places that we expect people to pause so that it gives people an opportunity to read and really think about the past and the future of the site. We also expect that there will be interpretive signage that we want to do that talks about planting and some of the strategies behind maintenance and some of the ways in which the landscape will look. So let's go ahead to what that will be like. So some of these signs you may recognize because some of them are from the city of Somerville itself, as well as some great signs that are used by our friends at the Greenway in Boston. We definitely want to have signs that talk about some of the moves that are happening in the landscape. And that's to both inform all of us within the community to have people understand why landscapes look the way that they do, but also to give cues for maintenance and future care of the site, and really hoping that people can help adopt the way things look and maybe even help in the process. The bottom row, we start to think about, we want to make sure that we have signage, again, that's wayfinding, but the middle image in the lower row, we love the idea of thinking about how signage can also feel like art. So how do you make those two really combine? And then on the lower right, starting to also think about, we have seat walls, we have other things. How can some of these do double duty for us? So whether that becomes a place that you have signage and other things to have sort of landing spots that become these thresholds that can really name a place or give it kind of let's say a front door. Go ahead. And art and interpretation, there are lots of ways we can go with this. We're really hoping that it can be bold and that it can be really important and site specific and have some cultural importance for the city of Somerville. We do really, again, go back to the idea that this was really a place that people stopped and then were introduced to the city. So we'd like to continue to have that in the art and the interpretation that happens. We also acknowledge that unfortunately people are on their phones even when they're out in beautifully designed parks, but we want to embrace that rather than turn that away. So thinking about places that people can, have those memorable spots, whether they're murals or selfie spots and things that we can incorporate into the experience of being out to the park. Okay, ahead. Now we're getting to some of the more, so we've done a lot of the hardscape and the non-green. So I'm going to go through this. We have a lot of information here. So, but we did want to let folks know that we have been really thinking about this and thinking about not only the canopy, but the way in which the ground plane works. I know Leah talked a little bit about how we want to have lawn in really in the flattest and the most usable spots. So you'll see that the lawn really is these zones of occupation. We're trying to then in other areas have the ground be something that can be more positive for the environment through the pollinator planting, as we've discussed, as well as on the woodland buffer, really actually leaving things a little bit more natural. We do have some steep slopes that we want to make sure that we have a plant that's robust, that will establish quickly and will really support the slopes that we're creating. Go ahead. So that, again, this is just a palette and some of the ideas that we're talking about. And I think we all understand the importance of usable lawn and places that you can run around and not worry about ticks or other things. So we will have that in discrete areas. The idea behind the pollinator planting is one that we are actually trying not only in this park, but in a lot of places. And so starting to think about how something can be lower maintenance, but also can be easily to establish and have a variety. So we were actually thinking about the idea of a rougher grass, ornamental or native, but longer stand of grass that then can be the host for pockets of other pollinators. So you'll see here in these middle images that that's really what we're trying to go after, and thinking about how you would then plug pollinators within an area that is a little bit more of a rougher look. Our woodland buffer, we may have just a rough green patches underneath the stands of trees, not expecting that this would be anything that would be highly maintained or would be a lawn that you would sit on, but acknowledging the fact that we could have some rough woodland base. And then the steep slope, we are looking at native plants, specifically aromatic sumac, which is really a workhorse for both stabilizing slopes and really great for the urban condition, and beautiful, has actually great year-round color. So we'll continue. So the trees, as we all know, are really important for the site to make sure that we have shade. We think that this is a great opportunity to both allow trees to help really define spaces through their shape and through their organization, but also to bring diversity into the site. So we'll say that what we want to do are on either end, the two gateways, or the gateway and then the area off to the west, is to have a grove of native trees of a single species in these areas, so that it really does have impact. Great fall color. It really sets up the bones of these two areas, shady and really will have a defined shape. The alley, we think, should also be a single tree species. Again, we're actually proposing an elm here. There are lots of varieties that have been very successful in not being I can't say the word, harmed by, wow, I can't say that word tonight, harmed by the Dutch elm disease. And so we would love to put in a stand of elms. We think it's actually a great historic nod to the period that the Junction would have been happening, when elms would have been a very prominent tree species throughout New England. The next two spots, where we're calling the buffer trees, which would be along the southern property line, you'll see that we're showing smaller species of large shrub, multi-stem, smaller trees. The idea here is that we have this area of canopy that already exists along the property line. We want to have trees that are understory trees that can handle the shade and really give a lot of texture and color to that upper path. And then lastly, the specimen trees that are shown in that lawn area. We want this to be more of an arboretum feel. So we want to very carefully place trees so that they provide shade for any of the areas that are for gathering, while leaving space for these trees really, really to grow large. And so in this area, although they're rendered in this plan as a single color, our idea is that it's a variety and a collection of great large New England natives. So if we go ahead, we can just show you what some of those look like. So for the grove, we're showing on the right-hand side what the spatial character of a grove looks like. You know, it becomes an area that's of dappled shade that you can be underneath. We're thinking about a bunch of different trees, but we would love them to be native. So the Nyssa sylvatica is an option. We're also thinking maybe it could be something even a little bit more unique. We love the hop hornbeam as an option for this as well. So we'll go to the next. And I think that we're all pretty familiar with the shape, the very unique vase shape that the American elm takes on in maturity. And we really think, again, a nod to turn of the century America and turn of the century New England cities that we would love to see the alley with elm. Go ahead. These are some of the trees that we're considering for the idea in and around the lawn. Again, a collection of trees that would be, you know, sort of the best and the brightest of what we have that would provide some fall color, really great habitat for trees. So we have 2 different kinds of oaks that we're thinking about: a tulip tree, sweet gum, shagbark hickory, hackberry, winter king hawthorn. A lot of these trees are things that are a little trickier to plant on a streetscape because they do have things like gumballs or acorns. So we love the idea of these being in the lawn or actually being within the pollinator planting, so that their litter is something that actually is not a nuisance to anybody. It actually is part of the rougher lawn experience around the edge of the oasis. Next. And then talking about the woodland buffer. So you'll see that the gray birch and the serviceberry, the witch hazel, the pussy willow, American hornbeam, flowering dogwood, sassafras, these are your smaller understory trees. They provide a whole variety of interest during the course of the year. And we want to have these in drifts and groups so that they can make a real statement when they do have their time of year to shine. So we want to make sure not only are they native, but we want to have a variety so that there's always something happening in that buffer at different times of the year. So while the witch hazel has its moment in the early spring, the sassafras is a gorgeous, gorgeous fall color. And then there are things happening in all of these and all the times in between. And I think I'm going to stop talking. That's really the overview. We usually end in a site plan so that we can flip back and forth when people ask questions. But we also have one more slide presented that does show the different views, the model views, these conceptual, looks into how places would feel. So I guess this is where we would open up, Rebecca, and start to talk to folks.
Great, thank you, perfect timing, and beautiful renderings. All right, so at this point, anyone who would like to share their comments, if you would like to raise your hand, I can sort of unmute you and then you're able to share your comments verbally. Otherwise, there's both a chat option and a Q&A option. I think the difference is that in the chat, everyone will see what you say. And if you send via the Q&A, I will see it and then I can read it aloud and we can answer questions that way. So there's sort of like 3 different ways that you can let us know what you think. So first hand raised I see is Stephen. So I've unmuted you, Stephen, and you should be able to unmute yourself and then share your comments.
Thank you very much, and hi there. This looks absolutely beautiful. This is a wonderful use of the space and a redesign of the park. I have one question. As it is right now, that area that abuts the rail line has been kind of overtaken by Japanese knotweed. And I know it's in so many of the public spaces around Somerville. And just knowing how hard it is to eradicate, it kind of feels like the type of thing that could swallow up sections of the park, sections of the pollinator areas. Is there any strategy to mitigate that or to remediate and remove it in the construction phase?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question. And thank you for noticing. So the plan is for GLX to finish up their portion of the project. And part of that scope is to remove everything that is currently on that slope. So, you know, what machinery or equipment they intend to use, I'm not sure, but they will entirely clear out the slope. And then they are on the hook for a native seed mix. So they'll be spraying a native seed mix throughout the slope. However, I think you make a good point about sort of weeds and invasives generally. And so one thing that the city of Somerville has been doing recently that's been working really well is utilizing like a 3-year approximately establishment contract with a horticulturalist when we, you know, when we create these new spaces and we plant these new plants, we want to make sure that the ones that we really want are the ones that establish, and that the ones that have been, you know, biologically like strengthened to take over, that we keep a close eye on them and we get rid of them as soon as they pop up. So the intention would be to have a horticulturalist on contract for this site for at least 3 years, so that we can make sure that, like I said, the plants that we want to establish are there and the ones that we don't want are eliminated. So hopefully that answers the question both about the slope as it exists, but then the park as a whole moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Too, just to talk a little bit about why we're thinking what we're thinking for the pollinator area. And we have one area, if you can go back, Leah, to the plan. You know, we really have one area that's going to be shrub intensive on either side of the seat walls where it's the steepest slope. We do want to provide a really robust vegetation that we know works really well and can outcompete the Japanese knotweed. There will need to be establishment period. But the areas that we show in purple would be something that are mown down once a year. And during that process would be cutting and not allowing invasives like that to establish. So part of the strategy for making it be a perennial and grass area, rough, would be because we know that the establishment of an area like that then gets mown does a better job of weeding out the invasives in the establishment period.
Great, thank you. Okay, so either you all did a fabulous job presenting and you've already answered every single question, or we have a shy group tonight. I don't see any other hands raised. I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. If anyone else has anything they would like to contribute or ask, please do raise your hand. We would love to hear from you. There's also
This is where I like to pretend that I'm like a radio host. So
yeah.
Please let me continue to pretend.
Otherwise, of course, you can always reach out to me via email, or there's a place on the Junction Park webpage that I presented earlier, somervillema.gov/Junction Park, where you can add comments and thoughts there. So lots of different ways to get in touch with us. We should be able to post this presentation onto the website hopefully tomorrow, as soon as the video kind of buffers and is ready to be posted, I will put it on the website. So if any neighbors or friends weren't able to join us tonight, you can point them to that webpage to see this this video recording. So okay, I have one more comment. All positive things. Looks fantastic. Love the different materials, zones, plantings. Yeah. Would recommend composite versus wood for the overlooks, which I think a conversation about maintenance is definitely going to be an important one when we think about all of the materials on the site. So yes, very good suggestion. All right. Oh, and another one. Would it be possible to remove the horizontal timber barricade between the gateway and Central Street? It would probably feel a lot more welcoming. Yeah, interesting question. Any thoughts from designers?
Well,
Yeah,
I do think, sorry. I mean, I think one of the functions of the model in this case is not doing us the greatest service, because let's go, I'll flip to that image. But so we will be more precise in designing the extents of the rail than you're seeing here. But we do think that it's important as a way to actually direct the flow of people into the site so that the entire edge is not permeable. And that's really thinking mostly about trying to send bikes onto that community path. And trying to confine the places that people come and go from the Grove, thinking about kids and just making it a little safer and buffered from the road. We are thinking that that guardrail will be, that timber rail will be in planting, probably not lawn. It's an opportunity for something else. This is kind of the level of detail that I think we get into now. So I kind of agree with you that it looks kind of off-putting in a way right now, but I think ultimately it won't, and its scale will be, it'll look secondary to things like the seating and the other opportunities to engage with the park.
I think too that we also think the thing, we're given we're mandated, or we have to work with the timber rail that will be all the way along the rail corridor. And rather than just saying, okay, well, that we have to use, we want to think about ways to bring the timber into a usable spot. And so can imagine that the members might be a little smaller, that also, again, the openings might be a little bit bigger. But the thing that's great about the timber rail is it actually does provide an opportunity for some short-term casual seating, and someone could sit there. It's not comfortable for someone to sit there for a long period of time, but if you're waiting, it provides a spot to sort of rest on. And we did like the idea, large, like heavy timber is an aesthetic that sort of is from railroad, thinking about the ties and things like that. So we do want to find some of those moments to start to tie these elements together with the history of the site. But absolutely, there's more design development on all of these, and we appreciate the comment.
Great, thank you. All right, while I'm waiting for any last comments or questions or hands to be raised, I will mention for the folks on the call who might be interested, the Public Space and Urban Forestry Division is also going to be working on a pollinator action plan for the entire city. So obviously in this park, we're thinking a lot about native species and pollinator species, but we're also going to be zooming out and looking at the city as a whole and thinking about that on a larger scale. We're really, really excited about the effort, and we're going to be looking for an advisory committee. So if you or anyone that you know might be interested in thinking about pollinators in Somerville, you can feel free to reach out to me or just keep an eye on the Somerville Parks Instagram page, and I'm sure we will be making announcements about the pollinator action plan there. But otherwise, just keep an eye out for the action plan itself. I'm sure it's going to be a beautiful and interesting and thorough document, sort of outlining our goals and plans for pollinators throughout Somerville. So that's another exciting thing on the radar. Okay, so one other comment that just came in also about the timber rail, sort of in line with what Naomi and Leah were just telling us, that the timber rail will be important to keep for the sake of safety and children and not running across the street. So yes, good comment, thank you. All right. Any last hands, thoughts? All right. Well, in that case, I will let everyone get outside since it's much more beautiful and temperate than it was just yesterday. Again, please feel free to reach out to me in any way you feel comfortable to tell us what you think about the project. Otherwise, we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
all.